At various points, multiple friends of mine spent time chronically using cannabis for anxiety, thinking that the anxiety was caused by their lives and that the cannabis was the only way that they could cope with their upper middle class existence. Of course, chronic cannabis use causes chronic anxiety. They got better when they stopped. Let us return as well to Tom Brady. Brady had it all, and he was absolutely convinced that somehow the thing that he needed to make his life complete was a 7th Super Bowl ring, and he was willing to sacrifice everything to get it. He must have believed that it would make him happy. It clearly did not. Today, divorced, he quite literally chases 20-something women at clubs. He has gotten plastic surgery. He's abandoned his commitment to represent fitness and healthy eating, selling out quite literally to junk food companies, to use his visage to encourage children to eat and drink Pepsi products. Does he think that selling out to Pepsi or picking up chicks half his age will finally be what makes him happy? How can he be so blind? How can it be so obvious to us? What about you? Do you want to be rich and famous, despite seeing how dysfunctional the rich and famous are? Do you run with glee to the shopping mall, thinking that your next acquisition will bring lasting satisfaction, only for the craving to come roaring back in a few days? Are you deep in the rat race, thinking that the next promotion will finally be the one that gives you esteem and lets you relax? Maybe get some sleep? Do you salivate over pizza and cookies, only to regret overindulging once again? Do you scream at the car that cut you off, imagining that you have somehow been deeply damaged by this triviality? Do you stew about it, imagine revenge, complain to your friends? Why do we do all of this? Are we running the show as we seem to think? Or did we sit upon a throne of lies? Welcome to Reconsider, a podcast about examining your life, because the unexamined life is not worth living. I'm Eric, your host. And today we're talking about the ways that your own mind lies to you, about happiness, about anger, about your own impulses, even about reality itself, and why the only sane response, once you actually see it, is to commit to the hard work to doing something about it. Let's start with that promotion some people are chasing. We spend way more energy picturing what the perks are going to look like than what the headaches are going to look like. Let's return back to some of those high school students that I talked to. They imagine that when they get into Harvard or when they get into McKinsey, something good is going to happen. Life is going to get a little bit brighter, a little bit sweeter. But that's not true at all, is it? Once they get there, they grind harder than ever. They keep thinking that salvation is just around the corner. They keep thinking, whether they're early in their career or late, that just one more promotion will bring something, maybe enough money, maybe enough pride, maybe enough esteem, maybe enough recognition from peers, that finally I can say, I made it. I made it. And then once I made it, something good's going to happen that I can't quite define either. But it never quite happens. Each promotion, each step up the corporate ladder brings new challenges, brings new headaches, and when you look up, you find that whatever bar you set has suddenly gone further. And the costs that you pay for this are real. You tend not to anticipate them. You lose sleep, you skip workouts, your health slips, you spend less time with the people you love. These are paid in full before any payoff shows up. The evolutionary mind is designed to survive, not to be happy. Your mind is a machine that is designed to get you to take actions that cause you to be more likely to pass your genes along in a caveman environment. And so, by design, your brain tells you that the next thing that you accomplish that's going to get you social esteem or resources is going to make you really, really happy for a lasting amount of time. It's designed to tell you that. It is also designed for that gratification to be much, much briefer than you think it is. Because if you're gratified and content for too long in your caveman days, you nap through the day and you might not save up enough dried meat or root vegetables or whatever for the winter. So you're designed to be like a donkey with a carrot in front of you. That is how your brain works. It is why you always think that the next thing that you get, the next thing you acquire, the next promotion is going to finally make you feel good. And it's also why you can't put together the fact that you thought this 15 times before and it didn't work the previous 14. We can look at this at an extreme scale. Lottery winners were studied in 1978 by Brickman, Coates, and Janoff-Bulman. If you take a happiness scale, 0 to 5, most people are a 3.82. If you then ask them, where do they think they'll be if they win $1 million? And by the way, this is $1978 million. It's a lot of money. If they win $1 million in the lottery, where do they think they'll be? They think they'll be at a 5, typically, maybe a little bit less. In reality, they get to a 4 from 3.82. This 4 is actually statistically insignificant. It actually doesn't pass the error bars around 3.82. The difference might actually be nothing. What is statistically significant is that lottery winners actually took significantly less pleasure from the ordinary stuff of life than do those who didn't win the lottery. So from a friend's company, from a nice breakfast, from a joke, the controls rated their pleasure an average of 3.82, and the lottery winners rated their pleasure at 3.33. So it's a difference of 0.5. That's well outside the error bars. And so on a whole, the lottery winners don't rate themselves as happier, and they actually have a harder time enjoying the simpler things in life. This was replicated in a second study that ruled out a lot of the obvious objections. This was done with over 100 people total. It's not a fluke. Daniel Gilbert has a great book called Stumbling on Happiness. He studied why we don't ever learn. The fact that we think that we're going to get more enjoyment and less frustration from something in the future, that's so well established as to not even be interesting to study anymore. He was curious why we keep getting fooled over and over and over again, thinking that, it's just going to be the next dune, that the oasis is underneath. And he discovered that we have a psychological immune system. It quietly rationalizes disappointment and adjusts after the fact, this thing called immune neglect. And we cannot see it operating in ourselves. So every time we find that the thing we wanted doesn't give us the joy, pleasure, and lasting satisfaction that we expected, it feels like new information, even though it's not. It's also relatively well established that people who earn higher incomes are happier, except that this must be relative for it to work. So the fact that all of us make a lot more money than people in the 1700s does not mean we're all tons happier. We can see this over shorter timelines. Almost everybody, including controlling for inflation, makes significantly more money than people in the 60s did, but they're not happier on average. People who make more money than other people today are somewhat happier, but the average American is not happier than they were in the 60s, even though they unquestionably make more money and have access to more things that they think they want. This constant craving and inability to find satisfaction in accomplishments or in acquisitions is fundamental to the mind. It makes total sense evolutionarily. It helped your ancestors survive, and it helped them pass on their genes. So a tendency to constantly want to strive to acquire more or accomplish more or win more esteem, it makes sense that that got passed down to you because it was more survivable. And your brain quite specifically tricks you into thinking that you're going to get lasting satisfaction soon. And it quite specifically makes sure that you never, ever will. Your brain tricks you about the causes of your anger and anxiety as well. Again, for very specific reasons. So let's go back to that traffic example, right? I used to be a very angry guy. Someone cut me off in traffic. I got so mad. And I would, of course, justify that anger when someone said, hey, can you calm down a little bit? I'd say, no, I can't calm down. This person did this thing to me. They're terrible, right? My brain very quickly raced to rationalize why it was not only reasonable and justified to be angry, but important to be angry. Of course, it's nonsense, right? It's indefensible to be angry. One, you lost maybe 2 seconds. And two, you being angry isn't actually going to cause better behavior in the future, right? It's not even a deterrent or some kind of, social control system. It's literally road rage. You're never going to see that person. Or if they do see you, let's say it's in public, you have a freak out at somebody, or they see the road rage, almost all the time, that person doesn't go, oh man, I was a real bad person to get this person to freak out. They, of course, tell their story about how they're the victim because you're freaking out at them. It tends to be the case that we also carry on this anger. We keep it alive as much as we can for hours or days. We go retell it to friends. We can't wait to tell them about how we've been wrong, right? People wander around and they can't help but think in their heads about, oh, this is what I'd say to them if I, had the opportunity, as if it's going to help something. So your brain tells you it's really important to keep this anger alive. But it's obviously not. And your brain also tells you that it is an inevitable consequence of the event that you are angry. That's certainly not true. Philosophers have been aware of this for a long time, long before psychologists proved it undeniably. Epictetus, the original Stoic, one of my guys, 2,000 years ago, discovered that people are not disturbed by things or events. They're disturbed by their opinions of things or events. This became psychologist Albert Ellis's ABC model. A is the activating event, B is the belief, and C is the consequence. The activating event does not cause the consequence, the belief about it does. Your brain is actually specifically designed to rationalize what it did after the fact and convince you that the rationalization came before the action, and it will twist itself in knots to do this. One of the ways that we know this is by looking at split brain patients, where the right and left brain don't communicate to each other. The left brain is the only one that has speech. So the left one is the one that is going to rationalize and explain what happened. But it doesn't know sometimes what the right brain did. There are ways that with split brain patients, we can hide what the right brain is doing. We can then reveal what the right brain did and ask the left brain to explain it. It will. So in The Integrated Mind by Gazzaniga and LeDoux, there's a famous, one of many famous experiments by Gazzaniga on split brain patients, where the patient is shown a chicken claw on one side and a snowy scene on the other, and the two eyes are blocked from each other. So there's a wall between. And so the left eye, right brain, is seeing a snowy scene, and the right eye, left brain, is shown chicken claw. And the right brain is told to grab an object that is associated with what it's seeing. So the right brain is seeing the snowy scene with the left eye, and the left hand grabs a shovel. You then pull away the wall. You actually cover up the snowy scene. So the left brain now sees that it has a shovel in its hand, and it sees a chicken claw. And if the patient was asked, why did you grab the shovel? And totally confidently and with complete certainty, the left brain instantly invents an explanation. The chicken claw goes with the chicken because you need a shovel to clean out the chicken shed. And that's, of course, not the reason it was picked at all. The patient is not aware and largely cannot be convinced that they chose otherwise. So we're able to prove that a module in your left brain is a rationalization engine that takes things you did and tries to make up a coherent story about it. And so with these different modules, we see multiple lies stacked on top of each other. Let's peel them back one at a time. The first lie is that the anger is an automatic, natural consequence of what happened. That's false. 2, that the anger is justified or helpful. That's false, right? Nothing bad happened to you, and it doesn't help to be angry. And the third is that you've chose to be angry, right? The choosing to be angry is a rationalization that happened after the effect, right? There's this great aphorism about anger from like late 20th century. Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to get sick, right? You're the only one who's hurting. You're the only one who's hurting. It doesn't help you remotely. And then people will still, especially angry people like myself, will still continue to try to rationalize and justify it because their brain really wants to hang on to it, which is just itself a lie. They'll say, well, if you don't get angry, you're not going to do anything about it. That's certainly not true. Plenty of people do plenty of important stuff, even stuff regarding justice, without anger. In fact, people who act out of anger are more impulsive, they're less logical, they're less convincing, right? Anything that you would want to have, any skill that you would want to have in pursuing some kind of justice is actually inhibited by anger, right? You're less effective when you're angry. This is just proven. And so when the brain keeps trying to hang on to, I'm allowed to be angry, I should be angry, it's justified and it's helpful to be angry, these are all lies. These are all lies. And it's specifically because the left brain really does not like admitting that it's wrong. We'll get into why there's this kind of recursive lie system later in the show. Anxiety takes the same shape. We think that some uncertainty in the future causes us to be anxious. There are people who live with much deeper uncertainty than we do, in particular economic or financial uncertainty. Much deeper uncertainty than we do, but they are not as anxious as we are, right? It tends to be the case that people in the wealthiest countries with the best prospects for having a roof over their heads and eating consistently and even retiring, people in the wealthiest countries are the ones who are the most anxious, right? Anxiety is a defect in the modern age. The reason we get anxious about things that are either wildly unlikely on the one hand, or on the other hand, wouldn't be a problem if they actually happened, is Robert Wright in Why Buddhism is True talks about what he calls the smoke detector principle, which is that just like with evolution's tendency to want you to just acquire more because it makes you more survivable, even if you're miserable, evolution also wants you to be extra cautious. And so it will make you anxious about things that are very unlikely to happen, because being a little bit more anxious, despite the fact that it makes you miserable, means that some low likelihood event that killed off a few other people in the margins didn't kill off your ancestors. And so high anxiety people were slightly more able to survive, again, in caveman days when you're surrounded by, terrible weather and saber-toothed tigers and famine, right? Anxiety was something that was useful then, and now is largely not. But we will hang on to our anxiety. We will tell ourselves and we will tell everybody else that our anxiety is due to our lives, due to external consequences. And being anxious about something and ruminating over something actually has been shown by study after study to inhibit your ability to problem solve. If you've got a real problem that you're anxious about, typically you're not going to be very good at problem solving it while you're anxious. You're going to be much better at problem solving while you're at ease. And just like with acquisition, your brain convinces you that once you have done enough to sort of like prepare for whatever you're anxious about, you're going to feel better, you're going to feel safe, you're going to feel secure, and it doesn't happen. Because if you feel too safe and too secure and too content and too relaxed, right, you don't stack up even more root vegetables for winter. So we have these tendencies, these modules to be angry, to be craving, to be anxious, that don't help us. And our brain lies to us, telling us that, one, they do help you, and two, once you do what your brain thinks, once you do what your brain wants you to do, you'll be happy and content. And it's not true. There's a lie at the center of this. One of the reasons you think you're good at rationalizing is you have a model of yourself that basically there's a you that is in charge, right? There's a you that is making sort of conscious decisions, weighing a bunch of evidence from different parts of your mind, and then going, okay, thanks for all of that. Thank you, boardroom. We're going to go do this. Not only is it the case that the CEO doesn't make these decisions, there is no CEO. This is something we're going to have to unpack more in later episodes. But modern psychology has shown quite decisively that there just is not a CEO decision maker in you. If we look at Robert Kurzban's Why Everyone Else is a Hypocrite from 2010, what we've found is that the mind is a loose coalition of specialized modules that don't really share a bunch of information, hold flatly contradictory beliefs, and engage in a form of competition where they're sort of pushing on each other, often with hormones, and one of them wins. One of those modules wins. So sort of the, am I going to get angry? Am I going to get anxious? Am I going to be embarrassed? Am I going to run? Am I going to, just work really hard? Am I going to try to impress people based on this situation? One of them wins. Your conscious self is not the president. Your conscious self is more like, according to Kurzban, a press secretary. The press secretary announces the administration's position to the world, but there isn't a president behind the secretary. Behind the curtain is a sort of hodgepodge of arguing modules. The Pixar movie Inside Out is actually designed to model this current understanding of the human mind, and it does a very good job of it. Obviously simplified, but that sense of these like different parts kind of fighting over taking control of you, this is very real. The other thing about the press secretary is not only does the press secretary not know that behind the curtain is a hodgepodge of arguing modules, but the press secretary is not told the decision-making process. The press secretary is there to come up with a reason that everyone around you is going to think is quite reasonable for making a decision. In short, if you're the press secretary, the hodgepodge of modules lies to the press secretary first, and the secretary says, cool, that makes sense, and goes out and explains it to the world. And the reason for that is that you lie much more convincingly when you don't think you're lying, right? Typically, an unexamined mind is not all that clever and therefore thinks that what they're being fed is the total truth, even when that truth contradicts something that's been fed even 5 minutes ago, right? By default, the conscious mind is easily fooled by the rest of the mind. Robert Wright picks up the same CEO language. He says that your conscious self gets a front row seat not to the process of decision making and is not invited to it, but just gets a front row seat to the outcome, including whatever rationale won the debate. And so when someone asks you, hey, why'd you do that? A plausible sounding reason is already loaded and ready to fire, whether or not it's the actual reason. This is really important for social animals like ourselves, because we want everyone around us to think that we're great and awesome, because people who are good at getting everyone around them to think that they're great and awesome do what? That's right. They reproduce more. And so their genes get passed along. And so we have modules that are designed to, on the one hand, help us make sure we don't die, even if it makes us miserable, and two, impress everybody around us, even with dishonesty. Gazzaniga's split-brain patient inventing the shovel story with the snow and the chicken is not a weird freak thing that happens with split-brain patients. There's actually all sorts of ways to look at this problem. The 1978 study was just the first that got, as you might imagine, hundreds and hundreds of psychologists and neuroscientists very excited about this problem, and they all keep confirming the same thing, that what your mind is doing all day, every day, is making up reasons why it does stuff. The stuff that it does is mostly about old, outdated evolutionary modules. It defends the decisions that are made by those modules and doesn't know that it's doing it, even though it's nonsense. So it's not just that your brain lies to you about what will make you happy and content, or why you're angry, or why you're anxious. It's lying about who's doing the lying. There's no you above the modules that's making the call, that's making the decision based on these inputs. The storyteller is just one of the modules. It is a peer. And the storyteller is designed to be a liar. There are other ways that this plays in our daily lives. A good example here is using social media, right? This lying machine can get really, really easily manipulated when it comes to stuff that's really good at taking over a type 1 thinking brain and manipulating it, and manipulating the dopamine serotonin loop, which social media is perfectly designed to do, right? So, you grab your phone, you start scrolling, and before you know it, you've been vegetating for an hour and can't remember one thing you saw. That's one problem. But your brain lies to you, right? After you've done this a dozen times, 100 times, at no point does the unexamined mind on its own update and say, you know what, this kind of stinks. This kind of stinks. This isn't fun, and I lose a lot of time, and I wish I was doing other stuff with it, and I'd be happier doing just about anything else, so I'll stop. The brain says, oh, no. FOMO, man. You might miss out on something if you don't have social media. So it hangs on to it. It says, I'm going to be happier keeping this despite all of the lost time, despite the brain rot, despite everything. This isn't based on a survey. This is based on randomized experiments. There's an article from a study called No More FOMO from Hunt, Marx, Lipson, and Young in 2018. There were 143 college students were forced to cut to 10 minutes of social media on each platform per day for 3 weeks. They worried that they would become lonelier because they'd be disconnected from their friends. It turns out loneliness and depression dropped significantly versus actual use control. Turns out 10 minutes a day is more than enough to keep up with everybody. In the American Economic Review, Allcott, Braghieri, Eichmeyer, and Gentzkow, 2020. All this stuff is in the notes, by the way, these sources. They paid people to deactivate Facebook for a month before the 2018 midterms. Turns out it's almost all people that get studied are college students, which is sometimes a problem, but it's really easy to get them to do stuff for cheap. So they paid them to deactivate Facebook for a month before the 2018 midterms, and they spent more time with their friends and family. They were less polarized. They had higher well-being. And most people actually stayed off of it afterwards. So this starts to sound a lot like an addiction, right? And it is. It's the same mechanism that's addiction to drugs, addiction to gambling, right? Our brains lie to us. No, man, you need more of this. A little bit more will make you happy. A little bit more will give you lasting satisfaction. You can't get rid of this, even though it's destroying your life. With addicts, this stuff is just on overdrive. It's the same thing, but on overdrive. They can't see that the thing that they're addicted to is the source of their problems. They tend to become even more dishonest about stuff. They blame everybody else for stuff. And they can't imagine that they'll be okay if they quit, right? They think that the very thing that they're addicted to is the thing that's helping them cope, and that the rest of the world is, and the rest of their lives is the problem, when literally the opposite is true, right? This happens on overdrive with addiction to drugs. It is the exact same mechanism for social media, TV, etc. The same pattern goes in reverse with exercise and meditation. Everybody knows that exercise makes them happier. Almost everybody knows that meditation makes them happier. And what happens is, of course, we resist doing that because it's work, but we build an excuse afterward, right? Nobody admits that they're just skipping the gym. Nobody plans to do it. What they say is that they got too busy. But of course, you look back, were you really incapable of meditating for 10 minutes? Or even just dropping and doing a few push-ups and sit-ups? Of course not. It's literally not possible for you to be too busy for that. And so you just didn't do it. So the problem isn't that sometimes you don't work out. The problem is that you lie to yourself and you aren't able to stack up an honest reflection on, okay, I'm not doing this, not without some work. Junk food, same thing. Brain promises a big payoff, right? There's real research on food guilt, and junk food shows that before eating something, there's this deep craving, there's salivation, and there's like this imagining, this fantasizing that I'm going to bite into whatever this thing is, pizza, hamburger, cake, and I'm going to feel amazing. And then almost immediately after eating it, especially with sweets, there's guilt and shame and a negative physical feeling. But there's the belief that a positive physical feeling is going to come next time. It's just not true. Even the positive feeling doesn't come nearly as much as people think it's going to. And then the guilt and shame are very high afterward. In late stage addiction, part of what can drive some addicts to finally begin seeking treatment is that the pleasure is gone entirely for so long that a little bit of daylight can start coming in. I remember talking to some of the kids that I'd mentor about their social media use, and they fiercely fought the idea of using it less. That they need it, that they deserve it as a break, right? And I try to tell them, I'm not trying to take away your break. Just go do something better with your break. That's going to make you happier, right? But there was an active resistance to seeing evidence that this might be true. Your brain wants to hang on to lies. It's not just that it lies, it's that it really, really wants them and fights to keep them. The Harvard study of adult development, 80 years running, it's the longest running study, basically, of a wide longitudinal study of people's lives. The single best predictor of long-term happiness and health is relationship quality, diet, exercise, sleep, and getting into nature. This is undeniably true. Can you see when your brain is fooling you and lying to you about why you're not doing more of this? And it's because the brain is not a happiness pursuit machine. It thinks it is. It's designed to think it is. You're designed to be a donkey with a carrot in front of you. You're not designed to automatically do the things that make you happy. You're designed to seek utility. In fact, societally, we so believe that seeking utility is equated to happiness that we've sort of built it into our entire system of how we measure whether things are going well, right? There's a sense that more utility, more better, more money, more better, more stuff, more better, more acquisition, more better, right? More clothes in your closet is going to make you happier. Literally no correlation. Zero. Tibor Dovsky, 1976, The Joyless Economy. He has this idea of splitting goods that you can buy into like comfort, which are like convenience goods, and delight goods, stuff that triggers delight or develops a skill, stuff that keeps paying off. And he found that affluent society is systematically overbuy comfort goods and starve themselves of delight goods. And it's why you can be abundant and unsatisfied and bored, even though you've got way, way, way more money than anyone has ever had before, right? How much are you resisting hearing that from me, right? How much is your brain saying, oh, no, I don't, right? If only I had as much money as rich people, then I would be happy. Well, they're not happy. So how much are you fighting me on this? How much are you fighting the scientists on this? More broadly, utility is great, right? You having a nest egg so you can have free time, and having a vehicle that can move you places, and a safe house, all that stuff. Of course it's good. It's not a bad thing. What we forget is that utility has a broader goal. The broader goal of having utility is to be able to then go do something meaningful with your time, right? Why does anyone with millions and millions of dollars devote a single moment to making more money? Isn't the whole point of money to satisfy a whole bunch of needs so you can go bloody do something else and to enable you to go do that other thing? Now, maybe you enjoy your job. Would these people do it if they weren't getting paid? Right? What dreams do you have? What dreams have you had? What dreams have you forgotten? Now, it's also a lie that fulfilling your dreams is going to make you happy. But do you have a reason why you've abandoned them? Have they changed? Have they shifted? Right? The long-term happiness on dreams is that you shift from having a dream where you go, ooh, I need to be X and do X to be happy, to finding a calling, right? Which is much more organic. It comes about. You respond to it. The world presents it to you. It's a meeting of the skills and talents and capabilities and knowledge that you developed and what the world needs. Those two things meet. And it's not permanent. It's not one thing, right? People who find a calling are very happy. So are you looking for your calling? Our brains tell us very much that if we have less stuff or don't have more stuff, we're going to be unhappy. That we need more stuff to be happy. We imagine that if we had less stuff or if we lost a bunch of stuff, we'd be very unhappy. We can look at, for example, Wrigley and Schofield's The Population History of England. In the 1500s, English people tended to live to about 27 to 41 years, and they didn't have anesthesia, antibiotics, refrigeration, safe and fast travel, insulation for their house, retirement as a life stage, a protected weekend. Right? This list can keep going as long and long and long as I want. It never runs out. The things that you have now that people in the 1500s didn't have is unbelievably large compared to the things that you both have. right? They certainly didn't have food security. We imagine that we need all these things to be remotely okay, right? But by any record we have, they were not writhing in agony. I'm not saying that these things such as refrigeration, antibiotics, and anesthesia aren't great. They are, and they should enable you to be happier, right? They have the potential to enable you to be happier. We have not become happier with them. We use a lack of stuff, a lack of more stuff, especially when we go compare ourselves to other people's amount of stuff, right? Remember that more income makes you happier compared to other people now, right? This is a social comparison thing. We think it's that the stuff makes us happier. What actually leads to that feeling of goodness or badness is status. And then we lie to ourselves about that. We don't say, oh, I feel this sense of higher status and my brain wants me to have higher status. We fool ourselves into thinking that's satisfaction. It's not really. But wealthy people have status. They feel more important. Now, if that fades, of course, look at Tom Brady and a whole other bunch of other rich people, right? It's insatiable. There's no bottom. You have billionaires fighting it out to see who's going to be the richest billionaire / trillionaire. So don't be fooled. It's not actually going to make you happy. But it's also the case that almost everybody in the United States has plenty, everything they need to be happy, right? Nobody's about to go get surgery without anesthesia. Nobody's got to figure out how to keep food from not being refrigerated. Very, very few people, and they're not listening to this podcast. But your brain wants you to have status because in the back, yes, that's the right answer. Good work, Jimmy. Because high status in the caveman days led to more reproduction. And someone might say, now, people definitely get laid more when they have high status. Yes, but do they have more kids? Actually, no, right? And so remember that in the modern age, because of all these wonderful things, anesthesia, antibiotics, refrigeration, and all sorts of other stuff, it turns out your status isn't actually particularly linked to your survivability or how much you reproduce. And so it's not actually even a useful thing anymore. It's left over. But boy, oh boy, do we believe that we need more stuff to be happy, especially if other people have it. In reality, your expectations of what's enough float endlessly. There's no fixed bar. You adjust to your current baseline quite quickly. If that baseline changes, you adjust to that. This is why we look back to people in the 1920s, 1930s, and normal people seemed happy. People in the 50s seemed quite happy. They didn't have more stuff. If your situation changed such that you were suddenly wealthy, famous, whatever, your baseline would shift and you would find things to complain about, right? If our happiness was actually tied to the material goods we had, we would all just be running around full of gratitude all the time. Wow. I had surgery the other day and I had anesthesia. I didn't feel a thing. Wow. I got sick and I got antibiotics. That's incredible. Wow. Once again, I had access to clean water and I didn't have to think about it for a moment. Wow. I just opened my fridge and there's abundant food there. I don't have to go out and hunt for it, etc. Wow. I decided I wanted to go somewhere that was a few miles away and I just showed up, basically teleported, right? If our brains were rational about what made us happy, we would just be overwhelmed with happiness and gratitude about how amazing everything is all the time. But it doesn't do that. Is your brain fighting me on this one? Do you really think that just a little bit more stuff, 20%, 50% more stuff, then 100% more stuff? That's when you're finally going to just run around and go, wow, everything's just amazing all the time. This is the best. It's not true and never has been. It is the people who work on their minds that have consistent well-being. Kingsworth and Gilbert, 2010, a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. If you have not worked on your mind, in particular through some kind of mindfulness practice, your brain spends a lot of time just being unhappy on its own. It just discursively thinks about stuff and generates negativity. It finds things to complain about. It finds things to be unhappy about. It finds things to be anxious about. None of them need you to be unhappy about them. Every bad thing that's ever happened to you, well, here you are. You're fine. Almost everything you worry about doesn't come to pass. And when it does come to pass, you're fine. Almost everything you're angry about didn't matter. Almost everything you think is going to give you lasting satisfaction, everything you need between where you are and satisfaction, nope. That wandering generates all that. Richard Davidson led the largest long-term meditator research, looking at people who have 10,000 plus hours of meditation practice. They are measurably different. They are much happier, much more serene, less anxious, less angry, more compassionate. They're having more fun in life. They have more appreciation for the little stuff. They're much more likely to say, wow, I had surgery and it didn't hurt. That's incredible. Tim Kasser's The High Price of Materialism, 2002. People whose values center on wealth and stuff show measurably more anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, relationship problems across age, across income, and across culture. And so the more you think that stuff matters to you, the unhappier you will be just by thinking that it matters to you more. Look at the rich and famous. Look at how often they end up in rehab and divorce and public meltdowns with almost boring regularity. Acquiring money and status is not a route to happiness. And yet we keep taking that route anyway, over and over. We go after the route where we have overwhelming evidence that it does not cause well-being and satisfaction, and we ignore the routes that reliably work. So you have to ask yourself, if you look back over the last year, did you pursue happiness? And are you willing to? Do you have the courage to? Do you actually want to be happy? Or would you rather have excuses for not being happy? Would you rather blame the outside world for not being happy? Is it because you aren't appreciated enough by others? Is it because your roommate or spouse doesn't carry their weight, that you don't get paid enough, that your boss isn't great enough, that capitalism doesn't distribute enough wealth to you personally, that your parents weren't wise enough? None of these are scientifically valid drivers of happiness. They just aren't. Are you willing to see that? Are you willing to find the honesty in a brain that likes to lie? The human mind loves coming up with things to be resentful about and people to resent. It's just a mechanism. No life is so perfect that an untrained mind will not find things to be miserable and anxious and upset and resentful about. Only training of the mind can free you of this. Do you want to be free? But wait, there's more. The mind is not just terrible at knowing what's going to change how it feels about stuff, about itself, about the world. Your brain is also wrong about what's real. Your brain has a model of reality that makes it effective at manipulating reality, but bad at understanding it. And this is the part that is going to be hardest to wrap one's mind around and is going to require much, much more reading after this podcast to be able to even really grok. I shall do my best with the limited reading that I've done. Paradoxes are a great example. People get kind of caught up in paradoxes. They seem like contradictions in reality. Zeno's paradox is the one about either the rabbit or Achilles and a turtle. A turtle starts walking and Achilles gives him a head start, but then Achilles is running towards the turtle and Achilles is running towards where the turtle is now, but by the time he gets there, the turtle's already gone. And so he has to run to where the turtle is next, but by the time he gets there, the turtle is already gone, etc., etc. So in this paradox, Achilles can never actually catch the turtle. In the heap paradox, you have 2 grains of sand, you put them together. Is it a heap of sand? No. You add a third. Is it a heap? No. You add a fourth. Is it a heap? No. But then you get 1,000,000 grains of sand, it's definitely a heap. So at what point does it become a heap? And people will agonize over this. But they don't recognize that it's just a sign that the model of the world that you're using is flawed. There aren't paradoxes in the world. There can't be. The world just is the way it is, right? Sand just piles up. Achilles easily passes the turtle. That just happens. And so if the way you model the world struggles with this remotely, your model's just wrong. Even physicists have struggled with this over time. We develop an intuition about reality, and our intuitions tend to be Cartesian, linear, able to be broken up into boxes. able to be abstracted towards something simple that sort of like spits out kind of an elegant formula, right? That's our mental intuition about the world. Relativity totally messed up the Cartesian Newtonian concept of the world that we had. By the 1800s, we thought we'd more or less figured everything out. And we were very, very wrong, especially at the edges, right? There was this book published when Einstein had been talking about relativity called 100 Physicists Against Einstein. And Einstein famously quipped, wow, if they were right, why did they need more than one? But brilliant physicists just resisted this idea that time was relative and curvy, and that there's a speed of light maximum and weird things happen as you go faster, right? And we've proven relativity time and again. Of course, quantum mechanics killed the idea of certainty, that we can know that there is a definite position and momentum of a particle at the same time. There just isn't, right? Quantum does all sorts of weird stuff that our mind can't model. Quantum entanglement shows that two things can happen simultaneously without cause and effect. And of course, there's a split experiment that shows not only is light both a particle and a wave, but it changes its behavior based on being observed. Our brains are not good at handling this. We crave, right, our model of the world that our brain generates craves linearity and certainty. And these are things that are absolutely not inherent in the fabric of the universe. Your brain will not actually be able to intuitively model uncertainty, nonlinearity, acausality, and relativity. It is just a shortcoming in the model of the brain. And so what that means is technically you are not observing the world as it is, right? In a very real sense, what you experience in consciousness is projected by your brain. It is generated by your brain, right? Everything coming in, there are physical signals, there are audio signals, waves in air, there's electromagnetic radiation coming in, and then it's all turned into electricity, and then it goes to the brain, and it bounces around a bunch, and then consciousness experiences something. Your brain is generating the world just like a computer generates a simulation, right? So it is not ipso facto an accurate representation of the world. And in fact, there are ways in which we know it is not. This is really hard for everybody, right? Einstein, maybe smartest guy ever, fought quantum mechanics until his dying day. He said in a letter to Max Born that God does not play dice, right? So he was absolutely certain God does not play dice. The world is not made up of probabilities. It is made up of certainty. He was wrong. In McGilchrist, in The Master and His Emissary, outlines quite beautifully how this happens and why it happens. This is the one book in today's episode that I strongly encourage you to absolutely go read. The Master and His Emissary in McGilchrist. It's about brain lateralization. He talks about why the left and the right brain are split, why there's limited communication between them, why they're asymmetrical. One thing we know is that they are actually more and more asymmetrical in more and more brain-evolved animals. Not less, with fewer connections between them, not more. So we actually have the most asymmetrical brains with the least connection that do the most different stuff when we're participating in tasks. It's now relatively settled, although he gets quite philosophical in this book, which is part of why I think it's very interesting, is that the left and right brain have two fundamentally incompatible ways of seeing and understanding the world that are both useful. He believes the right brain's way of seeing the world, which is to take it all in at once as a gestalt, and to understand that all things are relative to each other and interconnected in a very kind of Buddhist way. We have reason to believe that is a more accurate model of the world, and that the left brain, which breaks things up into chunks, into discrete things, abstracts them, turns them into concepts, is not actually an accurate way of viewing the world, but it is the one that we are able to articulate and are more familiar with, so it's the one that we just follow without question. He actually just recently worked with a bunch of physicists because The Master and His Emissary was so groundbreaking that 17 years later, that a whole bunch of scientists and artists and philosophers rushed towards him and were like, we got to do some work together. This is crazy. He worked with a bunch of physicists, and he published a paper recently mapping classical deterministic physics to the left hemisphere's mode and quantum indeterminacy and relativity to the right hemisphere's mode of working, which is like more comfortable with ambiguity and holds possibilities open. So We see that when people are modeling the world in a Cartesian Newtonian way, we use the left brain, and when we're modeling the world with the oddities that happen at very large and very small scales, the right brain is involved, which is reason to suspect that the right brain's way of viewing the world is likely closer to reality. We can't actually ever know with certainty if it represents reality. There's no way to verify that. Kind of scary. So your brain's not just lying to you about you, it's lying to you about the physical world. And it also lies not just for your own individual survival, but for your tribe. And this is where it gets really ugly and destructive, right? We see how these lies go off the rails on the edges, how people become very racist, how people are very happy and willing to make up and defend that humans that look different or talk different are inferior, right? And what happens is they conclude this in their tribe, right? Let's just think of the Nazis and the Jews, right? They conclude this and then they start looking for evidence to support it. At the most extreme cases, this is clear and straightforward, but guess what? It's happening all the time, right here, right now, in politics and also in our social circles. Socially, your brain is not very good at being a scientist. It is very good at being a propagandist. Why? Because your tribe also benefits from certain illusions. Just as you as a caveman benefited from certain illusions that caused you to be anxious, angry, and craving, those were survivable. Tribes were more likely to survive if they tended to all agree and think the same thing because it meant closeness. And what it means is that in conversation with our tribe, we tend to try to move towards all thinking the same thing, as opposed to have much interest in finding the truth through disagreement. Mercier and Sperber, 2011, Argumentative Theory of Reasoning, shows that, especially when we're talking to each other, we're not reasoning through in order to hold open a bunch of possibilities and then try to find what the truth might be. When we are a tribe, we reason to justify what we believe. Haight in the Righteous Mind, 2012, says intuitions come first, strategic reasoning second. He has a great image. He says, the reasoning mind is a lawyer defending a client it already decided is innocent. It is not a judge. He says that we're 90% chimp and 10% bee, that there's a hive switch when we get wrapped up with our tribe that submerges the self into the group. Natural selection favored groups that could cohere and act together over groups that couldn't, even when they're wrong. But in particular, that cohesion comes through having shared values, shared beliefs. In-group, out-group theory is very important. Our tribe is good, the other tribe is bad. Why? Because we're competing for resources with them. The fact that we're competing for resources with them means that we have to fight them, and it's much better to fight them with this belief that they're bad and we're good, and that killing them is morally good and morally sound as opposed to just selfish. And so whenever we're in a disagreement with another group, we very rapidly start making up terrible things about them and get together to defend those inaccuracies. And the freakiest thing is that we can be half aware of it while we're doing it. People can be half aware of it while they're doing it, and under experimental circumstances, they can get very twisted up and very frustrated as they catch themselves lying in more and more ridiculous ways and making claims that they know are more and more false. But they keep doing it. It's very, very hard to get them to say, you know what, that's wrong. The left brain is actually very good at digging in and pushing away evidence that doesn't confirm what it's already saying. It doesn't even need to believe it. It just has to say it's important for this to be true. So we see it a lot with Trump and his supporters, right? It's important that certain things are believed to be true so that we can win. And so you'll see sort of every time Trump says something, no matter how ridiculous it is, you'll see a bunch of people on Twitter jump to defend it, even though they part of them knows it's false because it's ridiculous, because the guy just says the most ridiculous things. But defending it is part of keeping the tribe coherent. And the more you disagree with the other side, even if you know they're right, the stronger your tribal identity is and the stronger the enemy tribal identity is. So this is also from our caveman days. It's extremely destructive, and it causes us to be very, very dishonest. The more polarized people are, the more dishonest they are in defending what they believe. And it is endemic. Robert Triver's The Folly of Fools, 2011. We deceive ourselves about our lying in order to either deceive others individually or participate in a group deception about the bad guy, about the bad tribe. Dan Kahan actually looks at what's called identity protective cognition, which is we are Republicans, we are Democrats, there's a certain set of things we have to believe are true, and we're going to apply our brain power to defending that kind of made-up reality, that false reality, rather than try to find reality. One really uncomfortable thing is that people who score higher on cognitive reflection tests are more politically polarized, not less. So being smarter actually just makes you better at defending nonsense rather than more likely to resist nonsense. This lying is very useful when bonding, not just in a war setting like we have in current politics or deep racism or capitalists versus Soviets. Lying is very useful there to froth people up about a war and get people to take action. But even just in bonding, lying can be very helpful. So a good example is a friend's 3-year relationship ends. Everybody loved the partner, but the partner, who's otherwise seemed to be very nice, breaks up with the friend, and the friend group, including you, immediately rewrites that the ex has always been a bit of a villain. Always been. Nobody decides to lie. It just happens. This person is a villain now, and what we're going to do is spend a lot of time coming up with reasons that they are a villain, and we're not even aware that we're doing it. We're not aware of the fact that we're actively just trying to rewrite history for emotional convenience and for us to bond closer as a group. We're not interested in reality and truth. Robert Dunbar shows us that gossip is sort of a form of grooming for us humans. Interestingly, apparently, roughly 2/3 of ordinary conversation between friends is gossip about other people. Talking about a third party together is a bonding mechanism itself. This conversation bends towards whatever strengthens the bond. We're good guys, they're not good guys. Not towards accuracy about the person being discussed. And certainly it's the case that among friends, our brains suppress information that would contradict what's being said because it would make us uncomfortable. Because we either have to, knowingly lie at that point, or we have to speak up and risk social ostracization for being honest. I'm sure we've all been in these kinds of situations. 2 other studies, Higgins and Rolls, 1978, and Echterhoff, Higgins, and Levine, 2009. The mechanism behind this is called shared reality theory, or the saying is believing effect. If what you describe is different from exactly what happened, for any reason, your own memory shifts to start matching what you just said, not what you actually saw. And with closer friendships, this shifting gets stronger, and it happens over and over and over. In this friend group retelling of the breakup, they will all start to remember the past differently and incorrectly because of this shared reality theory. Having a shared reality, even if it is inaccurate, in fact, sometimes especially if it's inaccurate, is helpful. Truth is not important. Agreeing like sheep is. There's an article called When Prophecy Fails by Festinger, 1956. What happens if a group, whether it's political or a friend group, has a shared belief of theirs disconfirmed by reality. So you see this happen a lot with Trump. Is just such a good example of this stuff because it's so blatant and so obvious to everyone who's outside of that bubble, right? What happens is they reinterpret it and then go to each other to reinforce that reinterpretation rather than say, oh, I guess we were wrong. Best example I can think of here is his troops getting very frothingly fired up about releasing the Epstein files for a very long time. And then as soon as it becomes inconvenient for Trump, he says, well, there are no Epstein files. It's made up by Obama. It's a Democratic conspiracy. He literally said these things. And you see a bunch of people rushing to defend it and say, why are we wasting our time with these Epstein files? Right? They just totally rewrote it. And it seems that they are half aware that they're doing it and that they sort of know that their soul is being corrupted. But it's so automatic and it's irresistible. Everything above is one long, belabored demonstration that in circumstance after circumstance after circumstance, your mind lies to you. It lies about your desires, your cravings, your emotions, your impulses. It lies about who's in charge. It lies about others. It lies to others as part of a drama, as part of a game. It lies with and for others, and it lies to you about reality itself. The reason I list all of this is not just to talk about it, it's to pile up enough evidence that you as a listener say, okay, this is actually a problem. I actually have a very poor grip on reality. And so what are you going to do if you have the courage to see that that is true? What are you going to do about it? Socrates, on trial for his life, said in Apology, the unexamined life is not worth living, right? He makes the claim that it is not worth living like this. You might as well be dead. The Buddha says that the root of your suffering is your craving, your compulsive desire to desire, and to never be satisfied, which are, as we discussed, lies built by your brain for evolutionary reasons. He says this is conditioned by ignorance, avidya. It is not a passive not knowing. It's an active misreading of reality, looking for permanence where there's impermanence, a fixed self where there isn't one, looking for things to be static when there's change. Plato's Cave looks at this directly. He talks about how most of our lives we're strapped to a rock and we're looking at a shadow play. And then if you break free and you go out into the light, it's very painful to be in the sun at first, but then eventually you adjust. This is the courage part. You eventually adjust. But people are so attached to the lies, right? Socrates says plainly in Republic that if the guy who gets out comes back to the cave, they mock him. They say his eyes are ruined from being outside in the light. He must not be able to see clearly. And that if he tried to drag them out by force, they'd kill him rather than go. The mind defending its illusion is not passive. It can turn hostile. Have you felt hostility towards me in this episode? Socrates was correct. Ian McGilchrist's work has confirmed it. The left brain wants to hold on to its lies and will get hostile over it. Leaving the cave is enlightenment. When you see the world differently, when you start to shed the illusion, right? And these lies are the illusion. It's the enlightened person doesn't see the world in different shapes and colors. It's not a change in the visual cortex. It's seeing past the massive tangle of exaggerations, abstractions, and outright lies that are just endemic to being an evolved, cultured primate mind. So if you're willing to recognize that your mind is lying to you and that lies cause you and everyone around you real suffering, and you're getting genuinely fed up enough to train your mind towards the truth instead, that's the moment that you get serious about the path of philosophy and the work of meditation. Not the academic subject, although reading about it is important. I mean, the old sense, a practice, a thing you do and are changed by, not a thing that you read and then file away as something to feel smart about. So Socrates, the Buddha, the Bhagavad Gita, Jesus, and all sorts of other people saw that most people will actively resist reconsidering their lives, even when the obvious truth is put out in front of them. It takes a rare soul to have the courage to recognize that the automatic way that we've been living is both destructive and false. This is the meaning of illusion and of waking up. It is the shadows of the cave. It is the light outside. I think The Matrix is one of the greatest movies ever made, maybe the best. This is the Matrix and reality. Your own mind creates the Matrix. Just like the cave, Morpheus was clear that most people in the Matrix will fight to hold onto it rather than allow themselves to see that they're in the Matrix. And so I'm going to use a controversial concept, the red pill, right, which people use for all sorts of destructive, terrible things, about really seeing things for what they are. The red pill is not about the world being a terrible place or about anyone else's behavior. It's not remotely about anyone else or what they do. The red pill is about you. Your lies to yourself about yourself, and your lies to yourself about others, and your lies with your friends about others. Your mind generates the matrix. Other people do not like it. They are not to blame. Nobody is doing anything to you. You are not a victim. All of that is illusion. All of that is, you might say, the blue pill. Taking the red pill, as it were, is not some external knowledge that makes you more clever. The red pill in the Matrix is courageous self-examination, a digging through the mind and a questioning of one's deepest unacknowledged assumptions that perhaps never ends. The blue pill in this case is choosing to go back, largely forget all this, get back to the business of suffering and blaming external circumstances for it. Really understanding your mind's lies is the beginning. There is a whole lot of wisdom on the other side, and that is the path of philosophy.